Winning conversations is short-term satisfaction. It feels good for a moment, but it leaves nothing behind. Winning people, on the other hand, creates momentum. Momentum compounds, it opens doors you didn't knock on and creates opportunities you didn't chase. And it all starts by removing the need to come out on top. Every time someone opens their mouth, most people assume credibility is built by talking, by explaining, by proving they know more than the person across from them. So they fill every gap with words, every pause with an opinion, every question with a long answer that tries to cover all angles. They believe silence signals weakness, uncertainty, or lack of value. In reality, silence is often the clearest signal of confidence. Talking less isn't about being quiet for the sake of it. It's about being deliberate. When someone speaks constantly, their words blend together. Nothing stands out. But when someone chooses their moments, people pay attention. Scarcity creates value, even in conversation. The fewer words you use, the more weight each one carries. Credibility doesn't come from volume. It comes from precision. People trust those who don't feel the need to comment on everything. The person who listens fully, waits, and then offers a concise insight feels grounded, measured, stable. That stability reads as competence, especially in high-stakes environments where everyone else is rushing to be heard. In professional settings, this difference is obvious. In meetings, the least credible voice is often the loudest. They dominate the discussion, repeat themselves, and jump in even when they don't have new information to add. The most credible person, on the other hand, might speak only once or twice, but when they do, the room shifts. People stop multitasking. Pens come down. That attention isn't accidental. That attention isn't accidental. It's earned through restraint. There's also a psychological effect at play. When you talk less, others talk more. And when others talk more, they reveal how they think. They expose assumptions, priorities, and blind spots. This gives you an advantage. What? You're not guessing where people stand. You're hearing it directly from them. Meanwhile, you're not giving away your position prematurely or muddying it with unnecessary detail. Many people overtalk because they're trying to control perception. They want to be seen as smart, prepared, valuable. Ironically, the effort to manage that perception often undermines it. Over-explaining suggests doubt. Repeating points signals insecurity. Jumping in too fast shows impatience. None of those build trust. Talking less also creates space for authority to emerge naturally. When you don't rush to fill silence, others often do it for you by asking questions. And being asked is different from inserting yourself. When people ask for your input, they're already primed to receive it. Your ideas land cleaner because they arrive by invitation, not interruption. This matters even more in leadership. Teams don't need constant commentary. They need clarity. Leaders who speak less and listen more tend to make better decisions because those decisions are informed by a broader range of perspectives. They also foster stronger loyalty. People are more committed to plans they had a voice in shaping, and that voice only exists when someone else steps back. Restraint in communication also protects you from unnecessary mistakes. Words can't be taken back. The more you say, the more opportunities there are to misspeak, overshare, or dilute your point. Talking less forces you to think before you speak. That pause acts as a filter, separating what feels urgent from what's actually important. This isn't about being mysterious or withholding. It's about alignment. Every sentence should serve a purpose. Either it clarifies, advances, or strengthens the interaction. If it doesn't, it's noise. And noise erodes credibility over time, even if the content itself is intelligent. When you reduce your words, you increase your presence. People sense when someone is fully engaged instead of waiting to talk. That presence builds respect faster than any impressive monologue ever could. Over time, others begin to associate you with substance rather than sound, with intention rather than impulse. The paradox is simple. The less you try to sound credible, the more credible you become. Not because you're hiding, but because you're disciplined. Because you trust that your value doesn't need constant advertisement. And because when you finally do speak, it's clear you've actually thought about what needed to be said. Most people believe they're good listeners. They nod, maintain eye contact, and stay quiet while the other person is talking. But beneath the surface, their attention is split. Part of them is already drafting a response, shaping a counterpoint, or preparing a story that relates back to themselves. They're not listening to understand. They're listening to reply. And that difference is subtle, but it's everything. When you listen to reply, the conversation becomes transactional. You're filtering what the other person says through one question: how do I respond to this? That mindset reduces complex thoughts into sound bites and strips nuance out of the exchange. You hear words, but you miss meaning. You catch facts, but you miss intention. And people can feel that gap even if they can't articulate it. Listening to understand requires letting go of control. It means accepting that you don't yet know where the conversation is going and resisting the urge to steer it prematurely. This is uncomfortable for many people, especially high performers who are trained to move quickly, solve problems, and add value fast. Slowing down feels inefficient. But misunderstanding is far more costly than patience. When someone feels truly understood, their behavior changes. They speak more clearly. They become more honest. They correct themselves without being prompted. That only happens when they sense you're fully present, not waiting to jump in. Presence can't be faked. People notice when your attention is fragmented, when your reactions are slightly delayed, or when your response doesn't quite match what they said. The habit of replying instead of understanding often comes from a need to stay relevant. Silence feels like disappearance. So people fill it with commentary to reassert their place in the exchange. But relevance doesn't come from frequency, it comes from accuracy. One thoughtful response that reflects the other person's perspective is more impactful than 10 clever remarks that miss the point. This distinction becomes critical in moments of disagreement. When you listen to reply, you're preparing your defense before the other person has finished their case. That ensures escalation. You respond to what you think they mean, not what they actually said. When you listen to understand, you give yourself the chance to address the real issue instead of the imagined one. Many conflicts persist not because of disagreement, but because of misinterpretation. In professional environments, poor listening is often mistaken for decisiveness. People interrupt to move things along, assuming speed equals effectiveness. But decisions made on partial understanding lead to rework, resentment, and missed outcomes. Teams don't need faster responses, they need better ones, and better responses come from complete information, not assumptions. Listening to understand also reveals patterns. Over time, you start to notice what someone consistently emphasizes, avoids, or reacts strongly to. These patterns tell you more about priorities than any single statement ever could. You can only detect them if you're not constantly redirecting the conversation back to yourself. There's also a trust component. When people feel heard, they lower their guard. They stop posturing and start collaborating. This is especially important in negotiations, leadership, and partnerships, where unspoken concerns often matter more than what's formally stated. One of the most effective tools for listening to understand is reflection, not repetition, but interpretation. Paraphrasing what someone said in your own words forces you to process their message fully. It also gives them the opportunity to clarify or correct you. This simple act signals respect and attention, and it prevents costly misunderstandings before they take root. The irony is that listening to understand often gives you more influence, not less. When people believe you genuinely grasp their perspective, they become more open to yours. Resistance drops. Dialogue replaces debate. You're no longer pushing an idea uphill. You're walking toward it together. The habit of listening to reply keeps conversations shallow and predictable. The discipline of listening to understand makes them strategic and productive. It transforms communication from a performance into a tool. And like any powerful tool, its effectiveness depends entirely on how intentionally it's used. Most people are taught, directly or indirectly, that being right is the goal. In school, in work, in debate, correctness is rewarded. So the habit forms early. Prove your point, defend your position, correct the mistake. Over time, this mindset bleeds into everyday conversations where being right becomes more important than being effective. What gets overlooked is that correctness and connection are not the same thing. Being right appeals to logic. Being trusted appeals to emotion. And emotion is what drives human behavior. You can present the strongest argument in the room and still lose influence if the other person feels dismissed, embarrassed, or undermined. Trust doesn't grow from accuracy alone. It grows from safety. When you correct someone publicly, even gently, you create friction. You might gain a point, but you lose goodwill. The other person may nod in agreement, but internally, they're bracing. They feel exposed, sazed. That emotional response matters more than the factual outcome because it shapes how they engage with you in the future. People avoid those who make them feel small, even if those people are often correct. Trust is built when people feel respected, not evaluated. He, Chodwe. That respect shows up in how you respond when someone is wrong, incomplete, or unclear. Do you jump in with a fix, or do you explore their thinking first? The difference determines whether the interaction strengthens the relationship or weakens it. Or weakens it. In professional environments, this distinction is critical. Teams fall apart not because of bad ideas, but because of bruised egos. When individuals prioritize being right, collaboration turns into competition. People stop sharing early thoughts. They wait until ideas are fully polished, or worse, they disengage entirely. Innovation slows because the cost of being wrong feels too high. Leaders who understand this choose trust over technical victory. They ask questions instead of issuing corrections. They create room for others to arrive at the right conclusion on their own. This approach takes more time up front, but it saves enormous energy later by preserving alignment and morale. There's also a strategic element. When you correct someone immediately, you shut down the flow of information. When you let them finish, even if they're wrong, you learn more about how they think. That insight is valuable. It helps you address root causes instead of surface errors. It also positions you as someone who seeks understanding before judgment. Being right can feel satisfying. In the moment, it reinforces identity and competence. But it's a short-term reward. Trust compounds over time. Every interaction where someone feels heard and respected adds to a reservoir you can draw from later. When hard decisions need to be made or tough feedback must be delivered, that reservoir determines whether people lean in or resist. This doesn't mean ignoring facts or tolerating misinformation. It means choosing the right moment and method to address them. Timing matters. T1 matters. T1 matters. Context matters. A private correction builds trust. A public one erodes it. Framing matters too. Inviting someone into a shared problem-solving process feels very different from pointing out an error. People who are consistently trusted tend to influence outcomes without force. Their suggestions carry weight because others don't feel threatened by them. They're seen as allies rather than adversaries. That perception is powerful. It allows ideas to move faster and decisions to stick. The obsession with being right often masks a deeper fear of being seen as wrong. Ironically, those who are most comfortable admitting uncertainty tend to be the most respected. They signal confidence through openness rather than defensiveness. They're willing to say, I might be missing something, which invites dialogue instead of debate. Over time, people remember patterns, not points. They remember who supported them, who listened, who handled disagreements with grace. They don't replay every argument to see who technically won. They remember how the interaction felt. That feeling determines future access, opportunity, and collaboration. Choosing trust over being right doesn't mean lowering standards. It means raising them. It means holding yourself to a higher level of emotional intelligence and strategic thinking. The real skill isn't proving you're correct. It's getting others to move with you, even when the answer isn't obvious yet. Most people underestimate the power of a pause. They rush to speak because silence feels awkward, unproductive, or risky. They believe momentum comes from constant motion, from filling every gap with words. But in communication, speed often hides weakness. The pause, when used intentionally, is one of the strongest tools you have. Asking better questions starts with slowing down. When you don't rush to respond, you give yourself time to process what was actually said, not just what you assumed was meant. That processing creates sharper questions. Instead of surface-level follow-ups, you begin to ask things that cut to the core. Questions that clarify direction, expose assumptions, or uncover motivations that weren't obvious at first. Poor questions come from impatience. They're asked to keep the conversation moving rather than to deepen it. Good questions, on the other hand, create friction in a productive way. They make people stop and think. They force reflection. That moment of reflection is where insight lives, and insight is what separates authority from noise. Pausing before you speak also changes how your words are received. When you respond instantly, it can feel reactive, even if your intent is good. A brief pause signals consideration. It shows you're not just responding from habit or emotion, but from intention. People instinctively trust responses that feel measured rather than automatic. In negotiations, this is especially effective. When a question is followed by silence, the other person often fills the space by explaining more than they plan to. They clarify their position, justify their reasoning, or reveal constraints. None of that happens if you rush in with the next point. Silence invites disclosure. The same principle applies in leadership. Leaders who ask strong questions and then pause create environments where others think for themselves. They don't rush to provide answers. They let the team wrestle with the problem. That struggle builds ownership. People are more committed to solutions they helped uncover than ones they were handed immediately. Asking better questions also requires letting go of the need to look smart. Informal leaders often shape culture more than executives because their behavior sets the tone. When likable people speak, others listen not out of obligation, but out of respect. There's also a resilience factor. Everyone makes mistakes. The difference is how those mistakes are handled. When people like you, they're more inclined to assume the error was situational rather than personal. They look for ways to help you recover instead of reasons to distance themselves. That grace is invaluable, especially in high-pressure environments where errors are inevitable. Likability is built through small, consistent behaviors, listening without interrupting, giving credit instead of taking it, showing appreciation without expecting something in return, being reliable. These actions signal that you're not just focused on your own advancement, but on shared success. Over time, that reputation sticks. Some people dismiss likability as manipulation or politics. That misunderstanding causes them to neglect it entirely. In reality, authentic likability is a byproduct of emotional intelligence, not strategy. It comes from awareness of how your behavior affects others. You don't need to flatter or perform. You need to be considerate, consistent, and intentional. The absence of likability is costly. People may still work with you, but only when required. Information is filtered. Support is minimal. Opportunities pass quietly to someone else. None of this is announced. It simply happens in the background, driven by preferences no one openly admits, but everyone acts on. In sales, leadership, partnerships, and negotiation, likability often determines outcomes before logic ever enters the conversation. People buy from, follow, and partner with those they like. Data may justify the decision, but emotion initiates it. Ignoring that reality puts you at a structural disadvantage. Likability also scales. One strong relationship leads to another. Recommendations compound. Doors open through introductions you didn't ask for. This network effect is powerful because it's based on trust transferred from one person to the next. You can't shortcut it, but you can accelerate it by how you show up consistently. This doesn't mean chasing approval. In fact, people who try too hard to be liked often achieve the opposite. That's it. True likability comes from self-respect, from boundaries, from clarity. People respond well to those who are grounded and fair, not those who bend to please everyone. When you understand likability as leverage, you stop treating interactions as isolated events. Every conversation becomes an investment. Every relationship becomes an asset. Over time, those assets work for you, creating opportunities, buffering setbacks, and amplifying your efforts in ways that skill alone never could. And the most powerful part is that this leverage doesn't require perfection, status, or permission. It's built quietly, interaction by interaction, long before you ever need it. When pressure shows up, when decisions are made behind closed doors, when opportunities are scarce, likability is already working in your favor. Not because you demanded influence, but because you earned it through how you treated people when nothing was on the line.